From childhood to adulthood, Julian was always the chosen one in everyone's eyes. Only I had ever seen him, beneath the shade of a tree when he was 17, secretly reaching out to touch my sister's shadow. But when I turned 20, the Hahn family chose the utterly unremarkable me to marry Julian Hahn. My sister left the country in heartbreak. For the first time in his life, Julian went against the rules. On his wedding day, he chased after her overseas. By the time I saw him bring my pregnant sister back, 5 years had already passed. Perhaps out of guilt, Julian invited me to a meal. After dinner, he politely asked how I had been these past years, and whether I had a boyfriend. I shook my head. His phone rang, drowning out the words I was about to say. Not a boyfriend anymore. I'm married. He picked up the call. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, my 3-year-old son, backpack on his back, waved at me excitedly. Chapter 1. The hot pot we had just finished was still shrouded in rising steam. From Julian's phone came that cloying voice, carrying the willful arrogance I knew all too well. Her pitch rose, faintly reaching my ears. I'm already at the door, just come out, okay? Julian's fingers tightened around the phone, his knuckles paling slightly. He glanced at me awkwardly, a trace of guilt seeming to surface in his eyes. I turned my gaze away, toward the window. My son stood outside, shaking the big red flower in his hand at me. His little face was flushed with excitement. Outside the old restaurant in late autumn, the ginkgo leaves had already turned golden when the evening wind blew. Yellow leaves drifted down in silence, scattering everywhere. Julian's voice was very soft, as if he were explaining and placating the person on the other end. I stood up. Then I pointed toward the window, signaling that I needed to leave. The man lifted his eyes to look at me, then followed my gaze to the child outside, confusion surfacing in his eyes. I walked out of the restaurant. My son rushed over and threw himself into my arms. In a hurry, he proudly showed me the big red flower he'd won at kindergarten. I raised my hand and gently patted his head. Leo is amazing. Behind me, Julian's increasingly astonished voice sounded. Penelope, you really became a kindergarten teacher? Holding Leo's hand, I explained calmly, this is my son. Behind me, a woman let out a soft, mocking laugh. I turned around and saw my sister, Roxana, standing close beside Julian. She had always been the spoiled one, 5 years apart, and she was still as bold and radiant as ever, except for the slight swell of her belly now. Without any restraint, she wrapped herself around one of Julian's arms, tilted her chin up, and looked at me as she said, Penelope, even if you're unhappy that Julian abandoned you back then and chose me, you don't have to make up a child this big, do you? Leo clenched his fists angrily and glared at Roxana. I am my mom's child. I was born after my mom and dad got married. Roxana covered her mouth, laughing until her shoulders shook. Julian's expression remained as calm as ever. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Penelope, you're not quite the same as you were 5 years ago. What he really meant was, the dull, obedient Penelope of 5 years ago could never have made up a 3-year-old son. The nanny drove the car over. I said nothing more, took Leo's hand, and got in. On the way back, Leo suddenly asked me, Mom, is that uncle your friend? I lifted him onto my lap and shook my head, saying no. He looked up at me curiously. Then why does Mom keep that uncle's photo inside her book? Chapter 2. The car window was cracked open, letting in a trace of chill. I froze for a moment. I had thought that 5 years ago, I had already thrown everything away. Back then, there were simply too many things related to Julian, no matter how carefully I sorted through them. Some must still have been left behind. Leo spoke again. But the uncle in the photo, he's wearing blue and white clothes, and he's holding a big trophy. He doesn't look as old as that uncle. In my memory, that photograph slowly took shape. My thoughts were pulled far back in time. Julian was a genius. Almost everyone who knew him said so. At 7, he won a gold medal in piano. At 11, he claimed the National Middle School Track and Field gold. At 13, he entered university, majoring in quantum chemistry. At 16, He led a team to discover a new type of nanostructure and took home an international prize worth $1 million. His life seemed to have no weaknesses at all, yet such a genius. Someone who always stood high above everyone else. Had once, years ago on a mountaintop, half knelt in front of me and fed me a piece of malt candy. Then he carried me on his back, walking hundreds of steps from the summit down to the foot of the mountain. I had never tasted much kindness. From childhood to adulthood, my parents' attention was always fixed on my willful, unruly sister, so all it took was a single piece of candy, when my blood sugar dropped, for me to fall secretly in love with Julian for 7 years. I was used to running over to the neighboring university, watching him from behind. I had seen him as the flag bearer, standing straight on the platform as he raised the national flag, hidden among the crowd. I had seen his blue and white photo pinned at the very top of the science competition winners board, until the day my sister was caught climbing over the school wall to go to an internet cafe with some delinquents, and was punished to stand on the flag platform. After school, Julian came to the middle school to help lower the flag. I was cleaning the playground, standing in an inconspicuous corner, and saw him behind my sister. He stared blankly at my sister's shadow, stretched long across the ground. Then, silently and hesitantly, he reached out his hand, so careful, so cautious, and touched the fingertips in the shadow, just once, before hurriedly pulling his hand back. The boy who always lived among the clouds actually revealed such a fleeting moment of panic. The piece of candy I had eaten years before seemed, in that instant, to turn entirely bitter, surging from my stomach up into my throat. My sister, spoiled, reckless, and unmotivated, could tear a hole in the sky and still have our parents patch it up for her. And it turned out that even someone as perfect as Julian could be utterly infatuated with her. I got into the habit of flipping through the university magazine from Julian's school until I came across one of his articles. He wrote, "I live inside a cage, and I saw a disobedient little bird. It squeezed through the bars, tore open the dark curtains of the room, and rushed into the sky it longed for. People praise me for being obedient, but I envy the sky that little bird can reach." So he liked my sister. My parents seemed to sense something, and went to the Hahn family to propose a marriage alliance, hoping to climb higher. When Julian's parents were about to drive them out, Julian, uncharacteristically, spoke up. "We can try." That must have been the first time in his life that he voiced his own opinion in front of his parents. So the elderly matriarch of the Hahn family said with pity, "Julian Hahn has listened to you in everything since he was young. For something as important as his lifetime marriage, let him decide for himself just this once." And so the marriage alliance between the two families was settled. But the sister who had agreed beforehand suddenly changed her mind and said, "I thought he would at least protest a little. I didn't expect him to be this obedient and boring. What fun could there be spending a lifetime with someone like that?" Chapter 3. My parents couldn't bear to be harsh on my sister, and they couldn't afford to offend the Hahn family either. So, as a matter of course, they pushed me out to clean up the mess, even though I hadn't even graduated from university yet. All my life, I had picked up what my sister discarded. Only this time, what was thrown into my hands was something I had secretly looked up to for 10 years. Something I never even dared to dream of. The elders of the Hahn family didn't notice anything amiss. From the very beginning, my parents had only said it was the Sun family's daughter. But Julian knew the person my parents had first mentioned was not me. At the dinner between the two families, he remained silent the entire time, while I sat there, uneasy and on edge. After the meal, my conscience wouldn't let me rest. Summoning my courage, I sought him out alone in the backyard. I thought, even if I truly liked Julian, I still didn't want to spend my life with someone who didn't love me. If he wasn't happy, I wouldn't be happy either. But under the moonlight, Julian spoke to me gently. "I will take responsibility for you, and I will take responsibility for our marriage." My heart, hanging in my chest, thundered like a drum struck in an instant. That was the first time in many years that he and I became we. That word, marriage, seemed to carry a kind of irresistible temptation, even though I still wanted to ask him whether he would ever love me. Julian reached out his hand. In the night, he adjusted the scarf around my neck for me. The closeness brought back memories from many years ago, him half kneeling in front of me, feeding me that piece of malt candy when I was on the verge of fainting from low blood sugar. I watched his cool, pale fingers pinch the edge of my gray scarf, and suddenly I thought, perhaps, after all, he did feel at least a little fondness for me. That was enough. I believed that, based on what I knew of him, he would never betray me, but I had forgotten that what I knew were nothing more than countless distant silhouettes. When Julian and I began preparing for the wedding, the sister who had broken the engagement suddenly returned. She had been dumped by a delinquent and came back covered in bruises. She flipped through my wedding dress sketches, then stared at the bracelet on my wrist, the one the Han family's matriarch had given me. Then she looked at me, full of displeasure, and said, "Penelope, why do you always like picking up other people's leftovers?" I clenched the bracelet on my wrist, my face burning red as I said, "The engagement was agreed to by Julian. This is my marriage with him." My sister let out a soft laugh. She touched the bruise on her neck and slowly stepped 2 paces closer to me. Then, in her eyes appeared that familiar look of disdain and certainty. Smiling, she said leisurely, "Penelope, it's not that I'm desperate to fight you for him. I don't even like him, but seeing you, so pitiful, finally managing to pick up something worthless, and then watching it get taken away, with just a curl of my finger, that look of humiliation and resentment on your face. You have no idea how entertaining that is." I gritted my teeth, my tightly clenched hand flying up, and slapped her hard across the face. My sister screamed. My parents rushed downstairs at once, surrounding her, full of concern. Julian happened to arrive then, bringing me the wedding planning documents. The moment he walked in, he saw my sister, covered in bruises, tears streaming down her face. His steps halted abruptly, his expression changing in an instant. My sister looked at him and burst into tears. The moment her sobs rang out, Julian's eyes trembled, and without another thought, he rushed toward her. My father angrily condemned the delinquent's vile behavior. My mother wiped away her tears. Julian scooped my sister up in his arms. I heard his voice, faintly trembling, say, "Call the police first. Go to the hospital for an injury assessment." From the moment he entered to the moment he left, he never even noticed me standing by the window not far away. Chapter 4. "Ma'am, we're here." The nanny's words pulled me back from my thoughts. The car had already stopped outside the pet funeral home. I got out of the car, holding Leo's hand. I walked through the lobby and into the operating room at the back. I changed my clothes and put on a mask. I cleaned and stitched up a Samoyed that had just been delivered, killed in a traffic accident. The dog's owner sobbed as he said to me, "I'll pay whatever it takes. Please, make it look the way it did when it was alive." I picked up the surgical needle and thread, and suddenly couldn't help thinking, if I died in a car accident, there probably wouldn't be anyone willing to spend money to have my body stitched back together. Leo clung to me, asking for my phone, and dialed another video call. It was answered almost immediately, revealing Lazaro in a floral shirt, standing by the seaside. I heard him click his tongue softly. "Brat, I thought your mom had finally grown a conscience and decided to call me on her own." A woman dressed scantily squeezed her face into the frame. "Boss, whose kid is this?" Lazaro replied casually. "My son." From the other side came a burst of laughter, mixed with teasing voices. "Why don't you just say your grandson?" On the screen, the woman laughed until she bent over, reaching out to rest her hand on his shoulder. Leo looked unhappy. I took off my gloves and reached for the phone, about to hang up, but Lazaro took a few steps away, and the screen was left with only him. He reined in his smile and apologized to me. "Sorry, a last-minute arrangement at the company. I can come back tonight. If it's inconvenient for you, I'll have my assistant pick him up," I said softly. "It's fine." Lazaro hesitated, Then after a long pause, spoke again. Xiao Dang said he ran into you and Julian at a restaurant. He's back in the country? I rubbed Leo's head and told him to go play on the swing in the garden. Then I replied, yes. The sea breeze messed up the loose strands of hair on Lazaro's forehead. He looked away, his gaze drifting somewhere unknown. Penelope, if you need it, I'll cooperate with the divorce. I froze for a moment. Why bring this up all of a sudden? Lazaro lowered his eyes. I didn't hear his voice again. I thought of the woman who had just been leaning against him, and suddenly seemed to understand something. I spoke again. If you need it, we can divorce now. Leo is 3 years old. He can understand things. Lazaro abruptly cut me off. I don't need it. Surprised by his strong reaction, I looked at him in confusion, but he quickly returned to that flippant, careless manner of his. I'm an anti-marriage type. What would I need? As long as you're not in a rush to. His voice dropped slightly, and he hurried past the rest of the sentence. Rush to marry Julian, but my hearing has always been good. Even though I knew he was prone to talking nonsense, a sudden wave of displeasure still surged up inside me. Why would I marry him? Lazaro fell silent. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I said flatly, Lazaro, I'm not that cheap. I didn't listen to the apology on the other end and hung up the call. 5 years ago, after Julian suddenly abandoned me at our wedding, I had a complete emotional breakdown and developed depression. For the first time in my life, I completely lost control and made a scene. Back then, everyone thought the same way Lazaro did. They believed I loved Julian too much, that I couldn't live without him. They were convinced my relentless screaming and refusal to let go meant I had gone mad, all to force Julian to return home and finish that unfinished wedding. But I knew very clearly, at that time, I truly no longer loved him. I hated him. Chapter 5. I bitterly accused Julian of betraying me and charged my sister with the harm she had done to me. I spent a fortune hiring numerous media reporters. I wanted to destroy him, destroy Roxana, even if, in the end, all my accusations were swiftly suppressed by the Han family. Not even a single word made it overseas to reach Julian's ears. That was the first time I made a huge scene, trying to fight for justice for myself. I wanted everyone who mocked me, accused me, and judged without right or wrong, to clearly see that they were the ones who were wrong. But in the end, the result was nothing more than lifting a stone only to smash my own foot. In grief and rage, I drank myself senseless, only to be sent by my own mother into someone else's bed. She told me to accept my fate and make way for Julian and Roxana. After that, I sued my mother and sent her to prison for a year. I caused havoc at my father's company, nearly destroying his career entirely, and completely ruining my own reputation and integrity in the process. The Han family deliberately allowed rumors to spread. They claimed that the once gentle and impeccably mannered Julian Han had called off the wedding because I had cheated on him first, that I was already pregnant, and because of physical reasons, couldn't have an abortion. The injuries I had suffered became ironclad proof of my betrayal. No one believed it. No one believed that the flawless, perfect Julian could have been the one to break the engagement. So when the Han family released even the slightest hint suggesting the fault was mine, everyone immediately believed it. I made a scene. I fought back. I even went abroad, frantically searching for Julian. I wanted to have a hysterical argument with him, to curse him for how disgusting he was. If he couldn't let go of Roxana, then why agree to an engagement with me? What had I ever done to wrong him? Why did he leave me, wearing my wedding dress, abandoned backstage, and flee overseas right in the middle of our wedding? I went mad looking for him, but I had lost my phone, lost all contact information. No one was willing to give it to me. Once abroad, with a world so vast, I couldn't find him. I couldn't find Roxana. He abandoned me, yet the one who ended up disgraced and ruined was also me. I made trouble again and again, until I turned myself into a case of moderate depression, and lost my job as a trainee kindergarten teacher. After giving birth, I slit my wrists with a blade, fell from a high building, and was hit by a car in the middle of the road. Time and again, I narrowly escaped death. And then I realized, no one cared. The only person who even paid my life-saving medical bills, was Lazaro, the man who had once given me a single night of nightmare. I suddenly discovered that death itself was an incredibly pointless thing. I stopped hurting myself. I began using helping take care of the child as an excuse to enter Lazaro's home and drive a blade into his heart. I slipped the sleeping pills I had bought for myself into the warm water he drank early in the morning. He was taken away by ambulance because of his injuries. He was forced to interrupt an important meeting after collapsing at the company. In a strange, twisted sense of pleasure, my depression actually began to improve, and the infant wrapped in swaddling clothes began to learn how to grasp my finger, struggling to call me Mom. In the sunlight streaming in through the window, I suddenly realized it was the spring of another new year. I suddenly remembered the Penelope from her teenage years, who always sat quietly in the back row of the classroom, obediently studying. She wasn't likable, but she worked hard. She didn't deserve to end up like this. I began looking for work again, after causing trouble for over half a year and becoming notorious. I couldn't find any decent job. After searching and searching, only a pet funeral home took me in, working with the dead, seen by others as gloomy and inauspicious. The pay was mediocre as well, but I stayed, thinking I'd switch when something better came along. In the blink of an eye, 4 years had passed. I earned my pet funeral director certification, and never left the profession. That massive upheaval felt like a dream, and now, it seemed I had returned to being that quiet, unremarkable Penelope again. But in truth, the moment I saw Julian again, I still felt a sudden impulse to fling the hot pot on the table straight onto his head, until, among the ginkgo leaves drifting down outside the window, Leo excitedly waved at me. That was when I realized I had started to feel a little reluctant to give up my current life. I am no match for the Hahn family, no match for Julian either. Chapter 6. Leo clung to me for several days in a row. When he stayed with me, he was obedient to an extreme. I couldn't bring myself to refuse him, and work was unusually slow, so I personally took him to and from school for a few days. I don't know if it was because, after so many years, I'd seen Julian again, but it stirred up too many memories and left me feeling unsettled. On the way to drop Leo off and pick him up, I often felt absent-minded, as if someone were following me. There were even moments when, in the fleeting reflection of a car in the rearview mirror, I felt it looked like Julian's car. But whenever I turned to look again, everything seemed normal, until Thursday morning, when Leo's teacher suddenly called me and said Leo had gotten into trouble at school. He was playful by nature, but always knew his limits and never caused real trouble. This was the first time in over a year since he started school that a teacher had called to complain about him, worried that he might have been bullied. I rushed anxiously to the kindergarten. When I arrived at the teacher's office, however, I saw Julian, calm and composed, and Roxana, sitting on the sofa with a hand supporting her belly, frowning as she complained nonstop about something. The moment she saw me come in, Roxana shot to her feet. Her expression was a mix of shock and disgust. "Why is it you again? Penelope, this can't really be your son, can it?" I ignored her and asked the teacher what had happened. The teacher explained awkwardly. Mr. Hahn brought his wife to the kindergarten to reserve an enrollment spot for their unborn child. Little Leo bumped into Mrs. Hahn's stomach in the hallway. Mr. Hahn's meaning was, the child is still young. An apology would be enough. Leo stood to the side, fuming, clearly unwilling to apologize. That was why the teacher had called me over. With reddened eyes, Leo spoke angrily in a small voice after a long pause. I left the classroom to go to the bathroom. I was far away from her. She suddenly ran over and grabbed my hand. I just shook her hand off. He clenched his fists and looked at me with a hint of fear. "Mom, I wasn't disobedient. I didn't hit that lady's belly." When he was a little over 2 years old, he had overheard the nanny at home gossiping, saying that I never wanted to give birth to him, nor raise him. Later, Lazaro fired that nanny, but ever since then, no matter how playful Leo was, whenever he was in front of me, he became especially obedient, almost cautious. Children are young, but they understand everything. I believed him, and I also knew exactly what kind of person Roxana was. I walked over and pulled the frightened Leo into my arms. Then I looked at the teacher and said, "Let's check the surveillance footage." Roxana panicked instantly and sprang to her feet. It was Julian who said the kid looked familiar. I remembered, wasn't he that son you made up? That's why I went over to take a look. Who knew he'd get mad just for me pulling his hand a bit? Julian turned his head away and looked out the window. A flicker of discomfort passed through his eyes. I coldly demanded that Roxana apologize. Then I comforted Leo and sent him back to his classroom. When I left the kindergarten to hail a taxi back to the funeral home, Julian's voice suddenly rang out behind me. When was he born? His voice blended into the wind, trembling faintly as it was carried away. I stood by the roadside without turning around. That's none of your business. I heard his footsteps approaching from behind. The midday sun of late autumn stretched his tall shadow long, pulling it right in front of me. I suddenly remembered, many years ago, how he had secretly touched Roxana's shadow at the flag-raising platform. Silently, I stepped aside, avoiding the overlapping silhouette. Julian came to stand beside me. I saw the veins standing out sharply on the back of his tightly clenched hand. Penelope. I checked his enrollment records. He's in the middle class now. He's 4.5, not 3. Chapter 7. My fingertips trembled suddenly. I turned my head and looked at him calmly. So? A trace of gentleness surfaced in Julian's eyes. Just like 5 years ago. That night when he made promises to me, saying he would take responsibility for me and for the marriage. He took a light breath, then stepped closer to me, his tall figure casting a shadow over mine. In a low voice, he said, "You like children, but at the very least, I have the right to know." I froze for a moment. I thought he had found out about what I went through 5 years ago, but instead, he had come up with such a ridiculous misunderstanding. I couldn't comprehend it. "You think Leo is your child?" Julian's voice carried an almost unsettling calm confidence. "It's not a suspicion, Penelope. There's no second possibility." I stared at him for a long while, making sure he wasn't joking. I really couldn't help it. I let out a soft laugh. "Julian, between you and me, how could there possibly be a child? Before our wedding, we had indeed been together a few times, but his life had always been orderly, restrained, and proper. Even in bed, he never lost control. At that time, he was extremely busy at the research institute, running on an endless schedule. He didn't have the energy to want a child. Anything he hadn't planned for would never happen by accident. At least, I would never be that accident. But now, the gentleness in Julian's eyes gradually faded. He stared at me and said, "Everything has accidents. If it happened, then a child is possible." The word accident, coming from his mouth of all people. I didn't want to argue with him anymore and simply told him calmly, "Leo is not your child." I raised my hand to flag down a taxi, but Julian suddenly reached out and grabbed my hand, pulling it back from the roadside. He looked at me, his tone calm yet stubborn. "He is my child." I felt irritated and impatient. Yanking my hand back forcefully, Julian stared at my face, as if seeing something utterly novel. "Penelope, you actually get angry too." I took 2 steps back, watching him coldly and warily. In the past, he had never clung to me like this. The wind swept up dead leaves along the street, and the corners of Julian's eyes reddened slightly. For the first time, his voice lost its former steadiness. "You could accept everything your family forced on you, including the husband you were meant to spend your life with. Even when you were abandoned at the wedding, you could still give birth to a child in silence and keep living. I thought someone like you would always endure everything, never resisting, never getting angry." So it turned out that for the half year I went mad and made a scene 5 years ago, the Hahn family had indeed suppressed the news completely. They hadn't let Julian learn even the slightest thing, hadn't let it affect him at all. A taxi pulled up beside me. I waved it down, opened the door, and got in. Behind me came Julian's trembling voice. "If 5 years ago, the person your parents shoved at you had been a beggar off the street, you would have accepted that too, wouldn't you?" I closed the car door, cutting off his voice. In the rearview mirror, his hand hanging by his side clenched tightly. Silently, on a weekend evening, as I was leaving the funeral home after work, I suddenly received a call from the nanny saying Leo was missing. She had taken Leo to the mall to buy groceries. She only looked away for a moment, and he was gone. Her voice on the other end was filled with panic. I checked the mall surveillance. It looks like that Mr. Han. He carried Leo away. Chapter 8. My mind exploded with a loud bang. In that instant, I remembered Julian standing by the roadside, staring at me. That obsessive, forceful sentence. He is my child. When I saw Julian again after 5 years, I thought he was still the same as before, forever able to put on a facade of composure, restraint, and moral righteousness. But now I suddenly realized, he had changed, or rather, he had become closer to madness. My phone buzzed. A text message came in. It was an address belonging to a research institute. I couldn't think about anything else. I hailed a taxi and rushed there. My hands shook the entire way. My vision blurred. When I arrived at the institute, Julian was wearing a white lab coat, locked inside the genetic testing lab. Through the glass in the door, I saw the test tube in his hand. Inside it was a sample of crimson blood. His eyes were lowered, his movements calm and unhurried. He was using chemical reagents to extract DNA from it. His student stood beside him, handing him instruments, as if he hadn't illegally taken someone else's child. As if he hadn't illegally extracted someone else's biological sample, but was merely conducting the most routine test imaginable. My whole body trembled. I reached out and started pounding on the door like a madwoman. He could hear me, but he ignored it completely. My teeth chattered. I dragged over a chair from the hallway and smashed it with all my strength against the glass in the door. A sudden, violent crash echoed through the corridor, drawing a crowd from the institute. Julian finally turned his head and glanced at me through the glass. He was eternally calm, just like 5 years ago, when he left without a word, leaving me to play the role of the hysterical lunatic. I kept smashing the chair against the glass until a crack finally appeared. My hair was disheveled. The people who rushed over looked at me with shocked, displeased expressions. It felt as though I had returned to that day 5 years ago. That day, when I knew nothing, when I lifted my wedding dress and walked from backstage onto the platform, only to be abruptly met with waves of strange, mocking, questioning gazes. I heard people below whispering that Julian had messaged his parents and fled overseas, abandoning the wedding. Those overwhelming voices surged toward me like a tidal wave. Julian Han would never do something like that. He's always been sensible and well-behaved. Did the couple fight? Did something happen between them? The Sun family was marrying above their station. Did they force Julian into it? Penelope Sun may be obedient and gentle, but to match Julian, she still fell a bit short. Those voices that had long stopped crashing through my mind came vividly back to life once more. Amid the violent ringing in my ears, I continued smashing the glass hysterically, screaming at the top of my lungs, "Give Leo back to me! Julian, get out here!" Some people from the institute came forward to restrain me, trying to stop me. I flung them off violently. They frowned, displeased. "Mr. Han would never take your child. His research is extremely important and cannot be disturbed. If you continue like this, we'll have no choice but to call the police. Call the police. Call the police." A shred of rationality snapped back into me. In a panic, I fumbled for my phone, about to dial emergency services. But the laboratory door suddenly opened. Julian left his student inside and walked out himself. He lowered his gaze, looking at me, at my disheveled hair, my near-maddened state. His eyes moved downward, landing on my phone screen, where the emergency number was already entered. He slowly removed the gloves from his hands, lowered his eyes, and asked in a deep voice, "Penelope, are you sure that before seeing the child, you want to call the police first?" My hand trembled. The call didn't go through. I didn't dare gamble. I was starting not to recognize the person in front of me. I even couldn't help wondering, had he developed some kind of mental illness? I clenched my phone, my teeth chattering, and slapped him hard across the face. "Where is Leo? Where exactly did you put him?" Julian took the slap. His head turned to the side. A red mark bloomed across half his face. His lips drained of color. He calmly turned his head back, with the same stubborn gaze he had worn standing by the street. "I will prove it. He is my child." Chapter 9. That surging hatred I had forced down for 5 long years At this moment, it began screaming again, struggling desperately to break free from the depths of my heart. I stared at him with bloodshot eyes, my voice reduced to hoarse rasping. Even if you prove it, then what? Julian's lips moved slightly, the hand hanging at his side curled stiffly, his knuckles rigid. This time, he didn't say anything. Gradually, I found it hard to see him clearly anymore, and even harder to understand. Julian, what exactly are you trying to do? To prove that after being abandoned by him when he broke off our engagement, while he spent 5 years abroad being loving and devoted with Roxana, I could still give birth to his child without anger or resentment? To prove that after he returned now, with a pregnant Roxana by his side, I still cared this much about his child? To prove how cheap I am, how shameless, how utterly without dignity or boundaries. Julian looked at me, then, almost in a flustered manner, he lowered his eyes and avoided my gaze, with great difficulty, as if forcing out something unspeakably hard to say. He muttered, "Penelope, I might be a little regretful." I couldn't believe my ears, and whether he regretted it or not, what did that still have to do with me? After a long while, I could only grit my teeth and squeeze out 2 words. "You're sick." He clearly had no intention of telling me where Leo was. I was frantic with anxiety, like a headless fly. I could only rush around the research institute, searching everywhere in panic. Julian followed calmly behind me, his tone certain. "If he weren't my child, you wouldn't be this agitated." I grabbed a file from a nearby desk and hurled it viciously at him. His forehead split open and bled, yet a trace of pleasure surfaced in his eyes. "For the first time, I feel like you look alive." My emotions finally began to collapse. With eyes splitting wide, I grabbed everything I could reach and flung it at him like a madwoman. "Where is Leo? Where exactly is Leo?" Julian closed in, grabbing my violently trembling hands. I heard his twisted voice. "If I said the child in Roxana's belly isn't mine, that I could end things with her at any time, that I could take you and Leo back to the wedding house we bought 5 years ago." He had truly gone mad. I took a step back, but he pressed a hand against my shoulder. He bent down, his eyes so close as he stared straight at me. "If it were like that, you'd be happy too, wouldn't you?" I went crazy, shoving him with all my strength. "Get away! Disgusting, disgusting." The tightly drawn string in my mind was being sliced by an invisible blade. I could barely stand. I could barely see Julian anymore. He loomed closer, blocking out the light above my head. I was starting not to hear his voice clearly anymore. "Penelope." I thought I had finally broken free from that cage, but when I truly escaped for the first time, I realized the one thing I never wanted to escape from was you. I yearned for Roxana's freedom and indulgence, so I wanted to get close to her. But when I chased after her, I realized I only used her as an excuse to run away. I never loved her. His voice drifted farther and farther away. "But why? In those 5 years, did you never once look for me? To you, was it really that inconsequential?" I couldn't hear anymore. My back slammed into the wall. I had nowhere left to retreat. Everything around me began to sway. That trapped, suffocating fear, something I hadn't felt in many years, dragged me once again back into that lightless, pitch-black night. Chapter 10. It felt as if flames were scorching my body, as if my mind were about to explode. That man pressing me down, his face thick with flesh. The knife I managed to grab plunged into his shoulder. His scream, the slap that came crashing hard across my face. The world spun. I staggered and fled that room in a daze. There was nowhere I could go. I didn't know where that so-called mother, the one who pushed me into the abyss, was hiding, waiting to secretly photograph my next humiliation, to make me a laughingstock under countless eyes once again. I dared even less to return to the Sun family, to walk straight into a trap. I had no choice. I went to Lazaro's place. That month, he was away on a business trip out of town, and had paid me to help feed his dog. We'd known each other since childhood, but our personalities were worlds apart. We'd never really gotten along. Yet he told me, "Penelope, my dog is extremely annoying. If I hire housekeeping to take care of it, I'm afraid they'll lose patience and end up abusing my dog." But you're different. You're the most steady-tempered. What he really meant was that I was docile. Back then, driven mad by the desire to take revenge on Julian and Roxana. I'd spent a fortune hiring the media. In the end, it was all water carried in a bamboo basket. Nothing left. And I myself ended up penniless. When I pushed open that door, stumbling blindly inside in the dark, Lazaro had returned early and was sitting on the sofa drinking. After I fled the hotel, the last shred of rationality I'd been forcing myself to hold on to had long been burned away by the drugs. After that night, Lazaro apologized to me. He said he had moderate depression, that sometimes he experienced hallucinations. He said he thought it was a hallucination. That was why he hadn't pushed me away. I didn't believe him. Someone like him, a rich playboy drifting through life without restraint, having depression? I even thought he was deliberately mocking my illness. I broke down completely and smashed a glass bottle into his forehead. He got 7 stitches on his forehead. His eyes turned red. Yet he didn't make a sound. Both of us were sick in the head, drifting through many days in a fog. Then came the child I couldn't abort. The custody that followed after the child was born. I plunged a knife into Lazaro's heart. Yet I still had no choice but to use the lawyer he hired to sue my own mother. Then I faced my father, who hurled the dirtiest, most vicious insults at me, calling me a whore, an ungrateful white-eyed wolf. I stormed into my father's company and screamed back at him. Endless, never-ending, those days without light, so desperate they crushed the soul. In these past few years, I had tried very hard not to think of them anymore. The therapist said I was recovering well. Depression can never truly be cured, but as long as you can control yourself, stop reliving the past, those memories will slowly fade. But now, Julian was pressing down on my shoulders. He blocked out the light above my head. He leaned heavily toward me. It felt as though, the next second, his thin lips would touch mine. On his face, I saw the shadow of that thick-faced man. I saw myself too, drug-controlled, shameless, turned into a monster. In my ears were countless sharp, chaotic voices all at once. I couldn't push him away. In that instant, my reason collapsed completely. I bit down viciously on his arm, hating that I couldn't tear a chunk of flesh off. Julian's arm trembled. He didn't pull away. His voice was shaking. Penelope, I'm sorry. 5 years ago, I shouldn't have left you. Blood slid down his arm and reached my jaw. There was no release, only deeper nausea, an endless exhaustion. I looked at him and said, Julian, what exactly do you still want? Blood dripped from Julian's arm onto the floor. In his eyes was confusion and helplessness. I want to take you and Leo. A knock suddenly sounded at the door. The student Julian had left and the lab walked in. Professor, the genetic test results are out. Chapter 11. A surge of urgent joy flashed through Julian's eyes. He yanked the report from the student's hands. Then, the instant he saw the contents, his expression froze. The evidence he had personally verified clearly told him Leo was not his child. No accident. He clenched the report hard, confusion written all over his face, which gradually turned into agitation. Suddenly, as if he had figured something out, his expression loosened again. He gently set the report down and turned to look at me. Penelope, why did you adopt a child? My mind drifted, unfocused. Leo is my biological child. Impossible. Julian let out a soft laugh, helplessness in his expression, as if he were looking at a child full of lies. Yet the veins at his temple bulged visibly. His palm tightened slowly, his clenched fist pressing down on the report. He looked at me, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Penelope, do a parentage test with him, then I'll give him back to you. What he wanted was not a DNA test between me and Leo, nor was it the report he already held in his hand. What he wanted was a result that matched what he wanted, no matter how long it took. He brought in a blood collection tube, swabbing the back of my hand with a cotton ball. It'll just take a little blood. It won't hurt. If he's not my child, how could he possibly be yours? In my head, my own hysterical, twisted voice echoed again. He's not my child, Lazaro. I sent him to the orphanage. If you want him, go get him yourself. I don't want him. I don't want to see him ever again. He's not mine. Not, Mom. Leo wasn't disobedient. Blood flowed from the back of my hand into the collection tube. I thought of that unrecognizable version of myself. Then I looked at the equally unhinged Julian before me. I felt like I was sick again. My consciousness began to drift away, my body sinking endlessly downward, until a sudden, violent crash exploded outside the door. Then chaos, screams, something shattering. With a loud bang, the door was forced open. I saw a figure rush in like a gale. In a split second, Julian was caught off guard and knocked to the ground by a punch. The blood tube fell, half its contents spilling onto the floor. The intruder grabbed a chair and smashed it brutally into Julian's chest. Julian's body convulsed violently on the ground. People who rushed in afterward turned pale, shouting in panic, "Professor Julian!" This man brought people and smashed several critical instruments in the institute. Laboratory reagents were ignited and exploded. Many important data weren't recorded in time. The researchers have already called the police. Julian didn't respond, his face covered in blood. He struggled to crawl up. He fumbled frantically to pick up the blood tube on the floor, trying to retrieve the remaining half. More people rushed in, screams, shouts, scolding, attempts to restrain, arguments. My vision spun. Lazaro knelt down in front of me, half on one knee, his face smeared with blood. Maybe his own, maybe Julian's. His eyes were red as he reached out, trying to hold me. "Leo's been found. I had someone take him home. Penelope. It's okay now." I raised my hand and pushed him away, my expression confused. "What, Leo? I don't have a child." Lazaro froze instantly. I repeated blankly, "I don't have a child. I never gave birth to a child." My vision went black as I collapsed. He reached out and caught me. The last thing I heard was Julian's hollow, shattered voice. "Penelope, he isn't your child." Chapter 12. I slept for a very long time, drifting in and out of dreams. Day and night blurred into chaos. After many years, I dreamed of that day again. My father, in order to secure a cooperation deal with the Hahn family's pharmaceutical group, dragged the whole family along, shamelessly following the Hahn family on a mountain hike to ingratiate himself. As usual, I was the one left behind. My parents crowded around the Hahn couple, pushing my eloquent sister toward Julian. Julian kept a polite expression on his face, impatience hidden in his eyes. On the way down the mountain, he, like me, lagged far behind the others. When my hypoglycemia hit and I suddenly collapsed to the ground, my parents, my sister, and the Hahn couple were already nowhere to be seen. Julian Hahn had walked ahead for some distance, then somehow turned back. He half knelt in front of me and gave me a piece of barley candy. In fact, that wasn't the first time he had given me candy. Though he was a boy, his pockets were strangely always filled with sweets. I ate the candy and heard him ask softly, "Why is your health so bad? Doesn't the Sun family give you money to eat properly?" Then he silently took the money from his coat pocket and slipped it into mine. After that, he carried me on his back down the mountain. Both families were waiting at the foot of the mountain. When my father saw Julian carrying me down, he was overjoyed. For the first time, he gave me a proper look. My mother smiled as well and said, "Julian and Penelope are very close." The Hahn couple looked displeased, but still maintained polite expressions. "Penelope is obedient. Julian has been well-behaved since childhood. He only plays with well-behaved children." Julian set me down, his body stiffening suddenly. After that, he rarely interacted with me again. More often than not, I only saw his back as he walked away. One day, he suddenly skipped class like my sister and went out drinking. I happened to pass by his university. Outside the campus gate, I saw him standing with his mother. His mother's face was full of pain and disbelief as she slapped him hard across the face. Then she covered her face, crying in suppressed anguish. Julian said, "I'm sorry." I saw the hand hanging at his side clench silently. Later still, I saw him at the flag-raising platform, secretly reaching out to touch my sister's shadow. The dream shifted abruptly, leaving only my hysterical, unhinged self behind. I finally jolted awake. I didn't know how long I had slept. Turning my head toward the window, I saw that the yellow leaves on the treetops had already fallen away. I lowered my gaze and saw Leo curled up asleep by my hand, a fluffy little head. Lazaro was holding a cup of water. In his other hand was a spoon, which he brought gently to my lips. Dark circles weighed heavily under his eyes. He looked utterly exhausted, as if he hadn't slept for a long time. When he saw me wake up, his hand jolted, and the water nearly spilled onto the bed. Leo woke up too. He sprang to his feet, his face full of panic and helplessness. "Mom." "Leo." "Leo is being good." Lazaro asked the nanny to take Leo outside. He himself looked flustered as he said, Then you rest. I'll go out too." I silently watched him walk toward the door. After a long while, I spoke with effort. "Can you take me to see the psychologist again?" Chapter 13. I could feel it. I seemed to be sick again. Those past events that had stopped haunting me for so long were crawling back into my mind, crashing into everything. At my most painful point 5 years ago, I wanted to let myself rot. If depression drove me to death, then so be it. No one cared. I didn't care anymore either. A child I couldn't abort, a job I had lost, a tide of accusations, a future reduced to utter ruin. But now, I didn't want to be sick anymore. Over these 5 years, I had actually thought through many things. What happened back then wasn't my fault, and neither Lazaro nor Leo was at fault. That night, Lazaro really had been drinking, and his depression back then was real, so severe it caused hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. His father had an affair and transferred all marital assets away. His mother was gravely ill, with no money left for medical bills. Driven to desperation, he knelt before his father's mistress. When she flung the money at his head, his mother saw it. By then, his mother was already very sick. So sick she had forgotten that her own treatment required money. She thought her son had betrayed her too, that he was currying favor with the mistress for money. She rushed over. Staggering, she slapped him across the face, and in that instant, overwhelmed by rage and shock, she vomited blood and died on the spot. Not long after his mother's death, his father and the mistress went out of town and died in a car accident. He never got the chance to explain things to his mother, nor the chance to take revenge on his father. All that was left was a massive inheritance, passed on to him. After that, he was diagnosed with depression. He said, if I really were the person she thought I was at the moment of her death, how good that would be. And so, in everyone else's eyes, he became exactly what his mother had believed him to be, a reckless, extravagant rich second-generation heir, wasting money and drifting through life. Back then, when he claimed he wanted me to help watch his dog, what he truly wanted was that, if I liked it, I could take the dog away after his death. He knew it. I had always liked children, always liked small animals, just like Roxana once mocked, the weak and powerless, always like weak and powerless things. In a way, that night should really have been considered me forcing him. After that, a man who had already prepared himself for death was haunted by me like a ghost, facing the child I became pregnant with, facing Leo after he was born, facing my most vicious curses, facing the knife I plunged into his flesh. Lazaro turned back to look at me lying on the bed, his fingers curling anxiously. After a long while, he nodded carefully. Okay. I returned to the psychological clinic. After many years, I once again underwent closed treatment, psychological hypnosis combined with medication, sealing away, once more, those memories that had been stirred up in my heart. I still couldn't forget the past, but when I thought of it again, the pain and despair gradually faded once more. The day I walked out of the clinic and saw daylight again, I recalled what happened 5 years ago. It felt more like watching someone else's story. I barely remembered the hatred I once felt for Julian. I barely remembered how I had once loved him either. The psychologist said to Lazaro, the treatment effect is the same as 4 years ago, very good. Miss Sun herself is willing to let go. Hypnosis merely helps fulfill her own intention. He then stopped Lazaro separately, to explain some additional matters. I walked to the window and looked at the bright sunlight outside. New buds had grown on the treetops. It was spring again, just like many years ago. I thought once more of that Penelope, who sat in the last row of the classroom, obediently attending lessons and obediently taking exams. I thought things would get better. They already had. All those bad things belonged to the past now. I stretched my hand out the window and touched the sunlight outside. But suddenly, someone rushed toward me. I turned my head and saw Roxana, her face twisted with hatred, mixed with the desperation of someone at the end of the road. She violently splashed the contents of a beaker straight at my face. It looked like something from Julian's laboratory. I instinctively dodged, raising my hand to shield the side of my face. The liquid splashed onto my right hand, and then flowed down my arm. A split second later, searing, bone-deep pain exploded across my skin. Chapter 14. Roxana stared at me fixedly. She laughed maniacally, tears streaming down her face. Not far away, Lazaro rushed over. He hurled the phone in his hand straight at Roxana. The phone struck one of her eyes, and red flooded her gaze instantly, whether from rage or from blood. It was impossible to tell. She let out a piercing scream and still tried to lunge toward me. Julian appeared from nowhere and kicked her hard in the chest. She was sent flying, her head slamming heavily into the wall. I was pulled into Lazaro's arms and rushed to the doctor for emergency treatment. Behind me, Roxana's hoarse, hysterical voice rang out. Julian, what right do you have to hit me? What right do you have? You were the one who chased after me abroad. You said you didn't love her anymore. I waited for you overseas for 5 whole years. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have ended up like this, not even knowing whose child I'm carrying. Julian hurried after me, his icy voice responding to Roxana. You weren't waiting for me. You were just using me as an excuse to indulge yourself abroad. Roxana wailed in anguish, her voice growing ever sharper. I don't care. I don't care. It's all because of you. You have to take responsibility for me, for my child. 5 years ago, you abandoned Penelope because of me. And now you pretend, coming up with excuses every day just to see her again. The police arrived quickly and handcuffed Roxana, who was still throwing a fit. She screamed shrilly, "It's that bitch, she stole my man. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. Officers, you have to stand up for me." She had always been like this. No matter how excessive her actions, she would never admit she was wrong. That was the lesson our parents had taught her from birth. She was always the one indulged, always the one who could never be at fault. But this time, no one stood in front of her anymore. The police took her away. The doctor bandaged my arm and sighed softly. It's sulfuric acid. Fortunately, it was diluted, so the injury isn't too severe. Otherwise, an entire hand could have been destroyed. If it had splashed onto your face, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Roxana's intention had been to ruin my face. She couldn't tell whether it had been diluted or not. She had always acted recklessly, never considering the consequences. Julian stood outside the hospital room, his expression helpless and filled with regret. Regret for what? I didn't know. I stayed in the hospital to recover, late at night, while Lazaro went to the doctor's office to get my paperwork. My parents stormed into the ward. My mother burst into tears, just like always. She shrieked accusations at me. Aren't you not even badly hurt? Your sister knows her limits. She knew that sulfuric acid wasn't very concentrated. Why are you so vicious? Sending your own sister, a woman about to give birth, into a police station? She's your real sister. Do you have any conscience at all? My father beat his chest in anguish, his eyes full of hatred. She's been like this since she was little, lifeless, like a ghost, never grateful, never warm, nothing like Roxana at all. I watched them throw their tantrum with cold indifference, seeing that words wouldn't move me. My mother suddenly dropped to her knees with a loud thud, her head smashing hard against the floor. I'm begging you, this mother is begging you, okay? Your sister is pregnant, she can't be detained. I don't know what Julian said, but the police won't release her now. Go, hurry up, go get your sister out. She lunged at me, trying to drag me off the bed. I raised my left hand, for the first time in my life. I slapped her hard across the face. As she froze in stunned disbelief, I told her, word by word, I will not go get her, and I will never again take responsibility for your rotten mess. Chapter 15. My father charged over in a fury, raising his hand to strike me. You even dare to hit your own mother? Penelope, you've really gone too far. The hand he swung toward me was seized and flung aside by Lazaro, who had just returned to the ward with the paperwork. Once again, the room dissolved into chaos, shouting, crying, accusations. Hospital security escorted my parents out. This time, I felt nothing but calm. Lazaro hurriedly set the documents down and sat by my hospital bed, staring at me anxiously. Are you okay? I shook my head. I'm fine. He still didn't relax, his face tense as he carefully looked me over from head to toe. I said softly, I really am fine, Lazaro. I won't let them bully me anymore. He looked at me and finally let out a breath. I began telling him about the past. When I was a little over 3, I was playful. I was roughhousing with Roxana and accidentally pushed her over. She hit her head on the corner of a table and stayed in the hospital for a few days. After that, my parents always told me that my sister being sick was because I had pushed her, that I'd ruined her health, that my sister's poor grades, her spoiled behavior, her mistakes, were all because I had pushed her back then. Lazaro picked up a warm towel and gently wiped my hands. I had slapped my mother. I thought I was calm now, but my palms were drenched with sweat. Through the towel, he silently held my hand. I continued softly, for many, many years. That's what my parents told me, and I believed it. I carried deep guilt and self-blame, yielding to her and indulging her again and again. But actually, I had already repaid her long ago, and back then, her injury probably wasn't even that serious. It was nothing more than an excuse my parents used to justify their favoritism, a shackle they placed on me so I would always retreat and give in. I told Lazaro, and told myself, I don't owe anyone anything anymore, so from now on, I don't want anything to do with them ever again. Through the towel, Lazaro tightened his grip on my hand slightly. There was tenderness in his eyes as he said gently, Penelope, you never owed anyone anything in this world. He was the first person to ever say that to me. A deep ache surged into my eyes, and in that moment I suddenly realized, these past few years, he had already been like half a family to me. Before, I had never had family. I said softly, you too, Lazaro. You've never owed anyone either. His hand trembled violently in mine. I couldn't see the emotion in the eyes he lowered. But I knew, inside was profound pain. The guilt and injustice that had tormented him day and night for years. With nowhere to go, I withdrew my hand, then reached out again to hold his wrist, which he was trying so hard to steady, yet which still trembled. When there's time, I'll go with you to visit her grave. You can explain everything to her. She'll hear you. Or maybe she already knew. Maybe she was heartbroken, thinking she wronged you before she died, and thought you resented her, that you stopped visiting her. Lazaro suddenly looked up, his eyes bloodshot. I never resented her. Back then she was sick, not clear-headed. I met his pained gaze and nodded. Exactly. She was sick. She misunderstood. It wasn't your fault. Lazaro's lips trembled violently. He suddenly pulled me into his arms, his shaking chin pressing against my shoulder. He didn't let me see his face, but I knew he was crying. In this world, just like me, no one had ever told him that it wasn't his fault, that his mother's death was not his fault. After I was discharged from the hospital, I went with him to his mother's grave. I watched as, after many years, he knelt before that gentle black and white photograph. For the first time, he said aloud, I didn't curry favor with her, and I never betrayed you. The wind lifted fallen green leaves and gently swept them to his feet, like that woman who had once loved and indulged him so deeply, offering him a soft, wordless reply. Chapter 16. When I got home, Leo stood outside the front yard steps, peeking toward me cautiously. When he saw me get out of the car and walk over, he panicked and took a step back. I went up the steps and gently wrapped my arms around him. Mom's home from the hospital. Aren't you going to call me Mom anymore? Leo suddenly lifted his head to look at me. His little face trembled violently. and tears instantly welled up in his eyes. He clutched my sleeve tightly and burst into loud sobs. I thought you didn't want me anymore. You said you didn't have a child. I was being good. I was listening. Mom. Don't not want Leo. I held him tightly, a dull ache spreading through my chest. I'm sorry. Mom was just sick for a few days. Leo shoved his head hard into my arms, as if surviving a disaster. He cried until he fell asleep. My life gradually returned to calm. Julian still appeared around me from time to time. Sometimes, after drinking, he would stand there in a daze, repeating the same sentence, Penelope. He isn't your child. I no longer paid him any attention, passing by him indifferently and leaving. The media began to report that the once flawless Professor Julian from the Research Institute had been distracted during important academic conferences. That when interviewed by reporters, he answered questions irrelevantly. One evening, after I got off work and left the pet funeral home, I saw Julian standing outside again, lost in thought. Through the half-open glass door, I turned to leave through the back door, but suddenly, I saw his mother rush over, the woman who had always been impeccably dressed, composed and elegant, now had a few strands of hair disheveled, her expression unrestrained and furious. She rushed up to Julian. Without a word, she slapped him hard across the face. It's been over half a year. You've been back in the country for over half a year. Julian, how much longer are you going to keep this up? Penelope is married. Her child is already in school. What more do you want? What else can you possibly want? You've made me lose all face. You've made it impossible for me to hold my head up in front of your father and that wretched woman. Julian stared blankly at his mother. I saw the hand hanging at his side clench silently into a fist. Just like many years ago, after he had skipped class and gone drinking like Roxana, and been slapped by his mother. But this time, he didn't lower his eyes and say I'm sorry like he did back then. He looked at his mother for a long moment, then let out a miserable laugh. What I want, haven't you always known? I just want to breathe. His mother's furious expression froze for an instant. Julian's voice was hoarse with exhaustion and pain. Father already formed a new family outside. You couldn't bear to divorce him, so you demanded I surpass that woman's child in every way. You used me to spite them, to win back Father's heart. Every step of my life had to follow the path you wanted, the most dazzling, most presentable one. But Mom, I just want to breathe. Julian's eyes slowly reddened in the night. Mom, don't you understand yet? It's been more than 10 years. That man's heart won't come back. And my life, just to make you look good, has never obtained what I wanted. The woman's face, burning with rage, gradually filled with deep pain and confusion. But Julian, he's your father. It was that shameless woman who seduced him after all these years. He still loves us. Didn't that woman's son also enter the Research Institute and end up under you? Soon, we'll have our chance. Julian's voice trembled as he cut her off. I don't want to continue anymore. I won't keep playing this game with you. I want to find Penelope. I want something I want for myself. The woman's face seemed to tear apart in despair. Her emotions spiraled out of control, and she screamed, even if Penelope weren't married and didn't have a child. She doesn't love you, don't you understand? You heard it with your own ears on the wedding day 5 years ago. She was cleaning up her sister's mess. You went abroad for 5 years because of that. And you still haven't understood? Chapter 17. I stood inside the glass door, calmly. I recalled that unfinished wedding from so long ago. That day, I was wearing my wedding dress, waiting in the lounge to go on stage. My mother stood by my side, thrilled beyond measure. Julian's mother came in, the displeasure in her expression impossible to hide. I know everything about you replacing your sister. Since Julian is willing, I have nothing more to say. I don't expect anything else from you. But from now on, at the very least, you must be just like Julian, obedient, and listen to me in everything. My mother, terrified that something might go wrong with the wedding, hurried forward with a smile plastered on her face. You can rest assured. Our Penelope doesn't have any special talents, she's just exceptionally obedient. A marriage is a lifetime matter. Her sister was willful and changed her mind. When we told Penelope to step in, she was so anxious she couldn't speak for a long time, clearly unwilling. But the moment I cried, she nodded yes. She could never resist boasting about how compliant I was, as if she were talking about a kitten or a puppy. But at that moment, I hadn't spoken for a long time. It wasn't reluctance. It was because I was suddenly overwhelmed by joy, followed immediately by panic. Julian's mother left in deep disgust. Outside the door, I saw a familiar figure flash past. After that, when I stepped onto the stage, the news had already spread through the audience that Julian had messaged his mother and suddenly chased after Roxana abroad. I pulled my thoughts back. I saw Julian standing in the midsummer night breeze, his face desolate. His mother spoke urgently. That time, I gave you a chance to choose for yourself. And what was the result? What an enormous mess you created for me. Penelope went hysterical, made a scene like a madwoman. I stuffed her with money, and she still wouldn't let it go. She lost her phone, made a fuss demanding your contact information, and even went abroad to look for you. The whole world was turned upside down. I lost all face. Julian's dazed, defeated expression suddenly changed. What did you say? Julian's mother replied. I said you made me lose face. You said, who made a scene? For the first time, Julian's voice trembled violently. His mother frowned at him. Penelope. She usually looked so obedient, but back then she suddenly went crazy, like a mad dog. When she couldn't reach you, she even went abroad to look for you like searching for a needle in the ocean. She dumped all the little money she had into the media, saying she wanted to accuse you. She dreamed of destroying you and Roxana. She said you broke your promise, said you betrayed her. Emotions surged violently across Julian's face. He suddenly staggered, his voice shaking so badly it was almost inaudible. That's impossible. She never even sent me a single message. His mother's voice still carried lingering fear. Didn't I say it already? She lost her phone. With the way she looked back then, like a lunatic. How could I dare give her your new overseas number? At that time, your father and that wretched woman were both laughing at me. My world was collapsing. As she spoke, she continued in a distracted, uneasy tone. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done something like that either. Her mother drugged her and sent her to another man's bed. I couldn't stand people saying you were the one who did wrong, so I went along with it. Saying that you went abroad because she had been fooling around with other men. Julian stumbled backward, in panic and disarray. He reached out to brace himself against a nearby tree. The color drained rapidly from his pale face. What surged forth was utter disbelief, terror and fear at their extreme. At last, he understood how Leo had come into being. And at last, he understood that Penelope he had believed for 5 years to be silent and submissive after being abandoned at the wedding, had actually fought desperately for over half a year, gone mad searching for him everywhere. Julian was never foolish, so he could not fail to understand. If I had never loved him, I would not have gone hysterical, would not have hated him so deeply. And 5 years ago, if he had not been so arrogant, if he had simply taken the initiative to contact me once, to ask me a single question, if he had come back to see me even once, he would have known. Everything he had taken for granted over these 5 years was wrong. And now, it had all already passed. Julian's face began to convulse violently. His emotions spiraled rapidly out of control, collapsing into despair. His eyes were blood red as he suddenly raised a hand toward his mother. That hand shook uncontrollably. How could you treat her like that? How did no one ever tell me? Chapter 18. The woman looked up in disbelief, staring at the hand he had raised. Her voice turned shrill. What are you trying to do? Hit me. Julian, I raised you for all these years. Your father hurt me for another woman. Are you going to do the same? Have you lost your mind? Julian's violently trembling hand finally dropped. Weakly, inch by inch, on his face, there was nothing left but a deathlike confusion and despair. His mother snapped in fury. I treated her like that? If you hadn't abandoned her and run away from the wedding, why would I have had to face a hysterical madwoman? And why would her mother have sent her to another man's bed? Who started all of this? Who was it because of? Julian stared blankly at his mother, forcing himself to brace against the tree beside him, but his body still staggered again and again. At last, he could no longer bear to look at her. He turned his gaze away, angled his face toward the glass door, and through it, silently met my eyes. In that instant, I saw a tear slide down from his eyes. Julian and I had known each other for more than 20 years. This was the second time I had ever seen him cry. The first time was in middle school, when he had a high fever and missed a perfect score in math by 1 point. His mother made him stand outside the courtyard gate as punishment, without food. When I passed by his house on my way home, I happened to hear his stomach growl. I opened my backpack and handed him a piece of bread. He lowered his eyes to look at me. After a long moment, he said softly, "My mom doesn't let me eat junk food." I stepped in front of him, blocking the wrought iron gate, and said, "Then eat quickly. I'll keep watch for you." I watched him finish the bread in silence. Then, with his head lowered, a single tear suddenly fell. At the time, I couldn't understand how a piece of such ordinary bread could be delicious enough to make someone cry. Only many years later did I begin to understand. That day, to him, it wasn't just eating a piece of bread. It was probably the first time in his life that he had pried open the bars of that cage. Now, standing behind the glass door, I looked into his eyes filled with endless regret, sorrow, and hopelessness. But this time, I would never give him another piece of bread. I calmly closed the glass door and locked it. Then I turned around and silently walked toward the back exit. He seemed to chase after me. I heard the heavy sound of the glass door being struck, but I didn't look back. I never agreed to see him again, and I never answered another one of his calls. At the end of the month, I received a text message from Julian, sent from an unfamiliar number. He talked about that arranged marriage back then. He said he had known from the very beginning that Roxana would never obediently marry him. He knew the Sun family would definitely push me out to replace Roxana's son. He just wanted to know whether I would be willing. That day, when Roxana returned home covered in bruises, as he carried her away, he had actually seen me standing by the window. He only wanted to know whether I would care, or perhaps, in everything he did, he only ever wanted to know whether I loved him too. And on the wedding day, when he heard those words through the door, a deep unwillingness rose in him. Unwillingness that it turned out I truly had only been willing, only obedient. I didn't finish reading the message. I deleted it, then blocked the new number. Some words, when spoken too late, lose all meaning and only become disgusting. Chapter 19. My days went on as usual. When autumn came, I happened to hear news of Roxana's death. After she injured me with sulfuric acid, my parents compensated me with a sum of money. Aside from that, because she was pregnant, she was not actually sentenced, but she still couldn't accept it. Convinced she had suffered an enormous injustice, she made a scene, demanding that Julian take responsibility for her child. Julian's mother slapped her hard across the face. That very night, she somehow obtained so-called abortion pills from a black market pharmacy, pills that claimed to work even in late pregnancy. In a fit of anger, she said she would abort the child. She never considered consequences when she acted. Those drugs caused massive hemorrhaging. 1 body, 2 lives lost. This time, my parents could no longer help her cover up her mistakes. The life she lost could never be brought back. After that, there was the same endless chaos. The illegal pharmacy was investigated, and those involved were arrested. My parents, having lost their beloved daughter, turned gray overnight, nearly driven mad. When I heard about all of this from others, I found there was very little emotion left in me. By late autumn, Lazaro's husky demolished the house again. The dog bit open a fabric box he had hidden in the cabinet. Letters and photographs spilled all over the floor. After Leo discovered the crime scene, he picked up a photo and rushed downstairs to me in alarm. "They're all pictures of Mom. It ruined Mom's photos, it's finished." I looked at the photo. It was my back, taken when I was in middle school, walking through the backyard. On the ground was the shadow of a boy walking behind me. It took me a long moment to remember. That was from when I was young. when I secretly let Lazaro stay in my room. Back then, Lazaro's family lived next door to mine. His father was rarely home. His mother was in poor health, and when her illness flared up, she became emotionally unstable. She often kicked him out of the house. At that time, I lived in a small room on the first floor of my home, facing the backyard, barely more than a storage room. I thought he seemed even more pitiful than I was, so I let him through the small backyard door, and shared my little storage room with him, laying out a floor bed. He was already known as a troublemaker then, and I couldn't help warning him, "You're not allowed to rummage through my things." His eyes reddened as he protested softly. "I'm not a husky." Back then, I didn't know many things and asked him curiously, "What's a husky?" Lazaro explained. "A kind of dog that people find really annoying, noisy, always jumping and tearing the house apart." I thought about it and couldn't help saying, "Then raising one sounds pretty nice." My life in my youth was always too quiet. I had few friends, and my family didn't care much about me either. I slept in the most remote storage room, stayed in the most overlooked corner, but I longed for there to be more noise in my life. Perhaps because I often felt lonely too. I followed Leo upstairs. I looked at the photos and diary pages scattered everywhere, and at the dog crouched guiltily in the corner, pretending to be dead. The wind poured in through the window, blowing a page to my feet. I picked it up and saw the immature handwriting of a young boy. "I want to raise a husky someday and give it to Penelope. I'll give her the dog she likes. Will she maybe like me a little too?" Among the scattered pages on the floor, every single one had my name on it. Years later, I had accidentally glimpsed a boy's secret feelings. Urgent footsteps came up the stairs as Lazaro rushed in, flustered. He looked at me, then at the mess on the floor by my feet, and froze. The man who was never serious about anything now had ears burning red, utterly at a loss. After I tidied everything up, I asked him softly, "Lazaro, are we still getting divorced?" His voice was completely disordered in that moment. Can we not divorce?" I turned to look at him. "Aren't you anti-marriage?" The man instantly panicked, fumbling over his words as he explained, "Because I knew you were only doing it to make things easier for Leo to enroll in school, a marriage of convenience. I thought you didn't want to be responsible for me." In the sunlight quietly pouring in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I couldn't help but laugh. Chapter 20. At the end of the year, I took Leo to the mall to buy New Year supplies. By a shelf, I ran into Julian again. His face was ashen, his figure much thinner and more haggard. He was using his left hand to place a cup of instant noodles into a shopping cart. I was a little shocked. He would actually eat that kind of junk food now. His right hand hung stiffly at his side. Strangely, it was covered by a glove, tightly concealing his palm and wrist. I only glanced once, before shifting my gaze away and continuing to pick snacks with Leo. Julian, however, pushed through the crowd and hurried over to me, trying hard to appear calm and natural, yet unable to hide his urgency and fluster. He said, "It's been a long time. Could we have a meal together?" "There's a new place in this mall." I interrupted him flatly. "No." I didn't even bother making an excuse. He lowered his eyes in embarrassment and desolation. Then his gaze suddenly trembled violently when it landed on my hand. Following his line of sight, I looked down and saw the diamond ring on my ring finger. When he had first returned to the country, Lazaro and I were only in a marriage of convenience, and I hadn't worn a ring. Julian's lips quivered several times before he forced out a stiff smile. "Congratulations," I replied simply. "Thank you." Holding Leo's hand, I walked away. Behind me, he stood there for a long time without moving. At the checkout counter, I overheard people ahead of me whispering, "That's Professor Julian from the Research Institute, right? He was practically half an internet celebrity before. How did he end up like this?" Someone beside them replied in a low voice, "He's not a professor anymore. I heard that during an experiment. He accidentally knocked over a cup of concentrated sulfuric acid. One right hand, just like that. Completely ruined. The institute wanted to keep him. Said they'd assign him another assistant. Even with just his left hand, he could still work, but he refused and resigned." After that came a soft chorus of sighs. I stood there in shock. I knew very well that with his ability and experience, there was no way he would accidentally knock over a cup of sulfuric acid. But no matter what the truth was, his hand was ruined, and he had given up his career. I paid for my things and left the mall with Leo. Outside the North City Mall, snow had begun to fall. With the new year approaching, everything around was filled with festive cheer. In the silently drifting snow, I suddenly thought again of that year on the mountaintop. Julian half kneeling in front of me, asking softly, "Why is your health so bad? Doesn't the Sun family give you money to eat properly?" I couldn't say a word. He then took all the money from his coat pocket and placed it into mine. I heard him let out a soft sigh and say, "Penelope, from now on, how about I treat you to meals?"